What you're about to hear changes everything about Blind Frog Ranch. 9 craft, silent, hovering in perfect formation above the Utah desert. This wasn't a random sighting, this was a response. It started with 2 drill holes hitting a layer of strangely blue material at depth. That night, warnings came in. Claims of a blue aura across the mountainside. Urgent messages saying they'd stirred up attention, that it was dangerous, but they didn't listen. They drove back towards the ranch. Their truck started ticking like a bomb timer. Even after being ordered to pull over, they continued forward. Then the sky filled with craft. 3 objects rose and parked in place, surrounded by mist, completely silent. Then 3 more, then 3 more. 9 total, aligned in single file, hovering with impossible precision. No engine noise. No propulsion. Subscribe now, because what happened that night suggests something beneath Blind Frog Ranch is actively monitored and willing to respond when boundaries are crossed. Blind Frog Ranch didn't start as a paranormal investigation. It started as a practical project, a group of people working the land, exploring old mining claims, trying to understand the property's history and potential. But somewhere along the way, the work shifted. Strange things kept happening. Equipment behaved oddly. Certain areas of the ranch seemed to produce consistent anomalies. Normal planning started breaking down because outcomes didn't match the effort being put in. The team brought in serious help, not ghost hunters or paranormal enthusiasts, but people with specialized knowledge, contacts who understood scanning methods, ways to identify target points beneath the surface, techniques for mapping underground structures. The belief emerged, based on data and repeated observations, that the land has hotspots, specific locations where something unusual is either buried or occurs with regularity. These weren't random guesses. Ground-penetrating radar suggested anomalies at depth. Electromagnetic readings showed variations in specific zones. Historical accounts from previous property owners mentioned strange lights, unusual sounds, areas where animals refused to go. The ranch began to reveal itself as a place with patterns, with rules that didn't match conventional understanding of how land, geology, and physics should behave. Over time, the team developed a working theory. Blind Frog Ranch sits on something, whether it's geological, technological, or something else entirely. There's something beneath the property that affects what happens on the surface. And the key to understanding it might be accessing whatever is buried at depth. That's why they started drilling. That's why they targeted specific points identified through scanning and analysis. They weren't digging randomly, they were following data. But here's what makes Blind Frog Ranch different from other properties with unusual histories. It's not just that strange things happen, it's that the ranch seems to respond to investigation. When you dig in certain areas, things escalate. When you use certain equipment, phenomena intensify. It's as if the property is reactive, as if there's something monitoring what's being done and choosing how to react. And the Night of the 9 Craft proved that theory in the most dramatic way possible. Because the Night of the 9 Craft didn't start with the sky. It started with dirt, blue dirt. And what that dirt represented changed everything about how the team understood what they were dealing with. The instruction was specific. Drill 2 deep points on the east side of the property, specific depths, specific spacing. The precision of the directive suggested that whoever provided the information already knew what was down there. This wasn't exploratory drilling. This was targeted excavation based on data that indicated something unusual at depth in that exact location. The drilling operation began with standard procedures, modern equipment, experienced operators, careful documentation of what they encountered at each depth. For the first portion of the drilling, they hit expected geology, soil, rock, layers that made sense for the region. Then, at significant depth, the drill bit encountered something different. Material that came up blue, not slightly discolored, not mineral staining, blue. A color that shouldn't exist in natural subsurface soil at that location. The team examined the material as it came to the surface. It wasn't just colored differently, it had unusual properties. The texture was wrong. The consistency didn't match surrounding geology. It appeared more like a manufactured layer than a natural geological formation. Some described it as looking like an insulator, a barrier, something placed rather than something that formed naturally over geological time. Then came the detail that eliminated any possibility of coincidence. They moved to the second drill point, separated from the first by specific measured distance. Different location, different angle of approach, but targeting the same approximate depth. And when they reached that depth, they hit the same blue material. Not similar material, the same material, as if a continuous sheet or layer ran through the mountain, and both drill points had penetrated it. Think about what that means. Natural geological layers can extend over areas, but they vary in depth, thickness, composition. They're not perfectly consistent across distances, but this material appeared at the same depth in both holes, with the same property, the same coloration, the same same unusual characteristics. It behaved like a manufactured structure, like something that had been placed underground with specific dimensions and specific purpose. The team documented everything. Samples were collected, depths were recorded, photographs were taken. But even as they worked, there was a growing sense that they had crossed a threshold, that the drilling hadn't just uncovered something buried. According to what they would be told next, the drilling had released something, or alerted something, or broken through a barrier that had been keeping something contained. And the response was about to begin. That night, after the drilling was complete, after the equipment had been shut down and the team had left the drill sites, the message came in. A contact, someone connected to the specialized help that had been brought in to analyze the property, called with urgent information. They claimed to be seeing something unusual on their monitoring systems, a blue aura stretching across the mountainside, short lightning-like discharges appearing around the area where the drilling had occurred. This is where the tone of the entire operation changed. Up until this point, the work at Blind Frog Ranch had been methodical, careful, driven by curiosity and data, but the warning call transformed curiosity into consequence. Whatever they had done by drilling through that blue layer had triggered a response, and that response was being detected by monitoring systems that shouldn't have been picking up anything from a simple drilling operation. The warning intensified. Do not go out there. It's dangerous. You stirred up attention. The language was specific and urgent, not vague concern, but concrete warning based on observable phenomena. Whoever was on that call believed that the drilling had activated something, awakened something, or attracted the attention of something that was now focused on the property. The team faced a decision. They could accept the warning and stay away, or they could go verify what they were being told. These weren't people prone to accepting stories without evidence. They had worked too hard, invested too much time and resources, encountered too many anomalies that turned out to be real. They needed to see for themselves what was happening at the ranch. They needed to verify whether the blue aura and electrical discharges were actually occurring. So they made the choice to return, to drive back toward Blind Frog Ranch despite being told it was dangerous, despite the warning that they had stirred up attention. Because verification, seeing with their own eyes, documenting what was actually happening, that was more important than accepting a secondhand report. And that decision, that choice to return despite the warning, is what led them directly into the most extraordinary encounter of their investigation. On the drive back toward the ranch, still in communication with the contact who had warned them not to return, something changed. The vehicle began making a sound, not a normal mechanical sound, not an engine knock or a suspension rattle or any of the familiar noises that vehicles make. This was different. Unnatural. Those in the truck described it as ticking, like a bomb timer, regular, rhythmic, completely wrong. The sound was loud enough that the person on the phone could hear it through the call, and their reaction was immediate and intense. Pull over, get out of the vehicle, now. The urgency in their voice left no room for discussion. Whatever was causing that ticking sound, it represented a genuine threat, not a mechanical problem that could wait, not something to investigate later, an immediate danger that required them to exit the vehicle. This becomes a pivotal tension moment in the story. These are tough people, experienced, not easily frightened. They've dealt with equipment failures, dangerous situations, high-risk work, but something about that ticking sound, combined with the urgency of the warning, triggered genuine fear, practical fear, the kind of fear that comes from recognizing that you're in a situation you don't understand and that continuing forward could have serious consequences. They pulled over. They exited the vehicle. They stood on the side of the road away from the truck while the ticking continued, and they had to make another decision. Turn back, admit that whatever was happening was beyond what they could safely investigate, or continue forward, despite the warning, despite the truck's behavior, despite every indication that they were entering a situation that had escalated beyond normal parameters. And even after they stopped, even after the warning, they still chose to keep going, because something about that night felt like it was pulling them forward, like events had been set in motion, and they needed to see them through. Like the drilling, the blue material, the warning, the ticking truck, all of it was leading towards something that demanded to be witnessed. So they got back in the vehicle, and they continued toward Blind Frog Ranch. The moon was bright that night, unusually bright. Visibility was clear in a way that made the landscape feel exposed, open, like there was nowhere to hide. The Utah desert stretched out around them, familiar terrain, that suddenly felt foreign. The land seemed to be waiting, not threatening exactly, but expectant, as if something was about to happen and the property itself knew it. They weren't heading to the drill site. They were approaching a different area of the property, a low ravine that had been identified in previous investigations as another hotpoint. According to scanning data and historical accounts, something unusual was buried there. Some claimed it might be meteorite material. Others suggested it could be connected to whatever created the patterns of anomalies across the ranch. It was another target point, another location where the property seemed to concentrate strange phenomena. The contact on the phone was still connected, still monitoring whatever systems were showing the blue aura and electrical activity. And as the team described where they were going, the contact's tone shifted. Not angry, not trying to stop them anymore, almost resigned. If you insist on going, someone will meet you. The phrasing was strange. Someone will meet you. Not something might happen. Not you might see something unusual. Someone will meet you. As if the contact knew with certainty that their arrival would trigger a response. They descended into the ravine, moving carefully in the bright moonlight, watching the ridgeline above them, scanning the sky out of habit. The quiet was absolute. No wind, no animal sounds, just the sound of their footsteps and breathing. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every small noise, every movement in your peripheral vision. The kind of quiet that precedes something significant. And that's when the story stops being about the ground, about drill holes and blue material and buried anomalies. That's when it becomes about the sky. Because what happened next wasn't hidden underground or detectable only through specialized equipment. What happened next was visible, undeniable, witnessed by multiple people, and absolutely impossible to explain through conventional means. 3 objects rose over the mountain, not from ground level, not launching or ascending. They simply appeared above the ridgeline and stopped. Park, that's the word those present used. They parked in place. No drift, no wobble, no visible movement at all. They achieved position and held it with absolute stability, like they were locked onto coordinates in 3-dimensional space. The visual signature was unlike anything they'd seen before. Each craft was surrounded by what appeared to be mist or fog, but the effect wasn't natural atmospheric condensation. It was more like a cloud shell that formed around each object after it stopped moving, as if the act of hovering created some kind of field effect that became visible in the air around them. The mist seemed to cling to the craft, moving with them when they repositioned, dissipating and reforming. They were close enough to estimate scale, close enough to judge spacing, close enough that there was no question about what they were looking at. These weren't distant lights that could be misidentified as planes or satellites. These were solid objects with defined shapes, hovering at relatively low altitude, visible in detail against the night sky. And what terrified everyone watching was the silence. Complete, absolute silence. No engine noise, no propulsion sound, nothing. Aircraft make noise. Helicopters are deafening. Jets create distinct sounds. Even drones produce audible buzzing. But these craft made no sound at all, and they were close enough that any conventional propulsion system would have been clearly audible. The silence was almost more disturbing than the sight of the objects themselves, because silence meant these things weren't operating according to any known principles of flight. The team stood frozen, watching 3 silent craft hover above them. Part of their brains tried to find rational explanations. Secret military technology, some kind of advanced drone system, anything that would fit into a framework they could understand. But another part of them, the part that had been working this ranch for months, that had encountered anomaly after anomaly, that part knew they were seeing something that shouldn't exist. And then it happened again, because 3 wasn't the point. The point was the pattern. 3 more craft appeared, rising over the same ridgeline, achieving the same hovering position, forming the same mist-like effect around their shapes. They aligned with the first 3, extending the formation. Then 3 more, 9 total, all silent, all hovering with impossible stability, all aligned in single file across the scene like someone had plotted coordinates and positioned them with mathematical precision. The physics-breaking nature of what they were witnessing became overwhelming. 9 craft maintaining perfect hovering position, no drift, no adjustment, no visible means of propulsion. Formation precision that would be challenging for trained pilots in conventional aircraft, but these objects were holding position without any apparent effort, without any visible control surfaces, without any of the behaviors you'd expect from flying machines. No engine noise, no wind wash, no disturbance of the air beneath them. When helicopters hover, you feel the rotor wash, you hear the turbines, you see dust and debris kicked up by the downwash. crash. These craft produced none of that. They hung in the sky like they had been painted there, like they were exempt from the normal rules of mass, gravity, and propulsion. The absence of normal aircraft characteristics was as striking as their presence. Human reaction to the impossible is complex. One person in the group was locked in awe, unable to look away, trying to memorize every detail because some part of them knew they might never see anything like this again. Others were visibly shaken, their brains struggling to process what their eyes were reporting, fighting against the cognitive dissonance of seeing something that couldn't be real but undeniably was. Because the brain has frameworks for processing flying objects, planes, helicopters, drones, birds, even experimental aircraft. But these craft didn't fit any of those frameworks. They were too stable, too silent, too precisely positioned. They violated too many expectations about how objects move through air, how they maintain position, how they should behave according to known physics. And when your brain can't file what you're seeing into any existing category, the result is a kind of existential shock. And if 9 craft show up and just wait, if they achieve formation and hold position without any apparent purpose other than being visible, the question becomes terrifying. Who were they waiting for? What were they monitoring? Were they observing the team? Were they protecting something? Were they demonstrating capability? And perhaps most disturbing, how long had they been watching before they decided to reveal themselves? After the event, after the 9 craft eventually departed, after the team returned from the ravine shaken and trying to process what they had witnessed, the directive became clear. Remove the equipment, cover the drill points, step away from those areas. The message wasn't subtle. They had crossed a boundary. They had penetrated something they shouldn't have accessed. And the response, the 9 craft appearing in formation, was a warning, a demonstration, a statement that whatever they were investigating was aware of their presence and capable of responding. The equipment was removed from the drill sites. The holes were covered, secured, marked with warnings about stability and safety. But everyone involved knew those weren't the real reasons for shutting it down. The real reason was fear, not irrational panic, but practical recognition that they had encountered something far beyond their ability to understand or control, something that had demonstrated it was watching, that it could respond, and that it had capabilities that defied known technology. The eerie takeaway from the entire incident wasn't just what they saw, it was what it implied. The holes stayed buried for years after that night. The story was carried quietly, shared only with people who had clearance or involvement in the investigation. The team didn't immediately go public with what happened. They processed it privately, tried to understand it, debated what it meant for their work at the ranch. Because the fear wasn't really about the 9 craft themselves. The fear was about the larger pattern they represented. Blind Frog Ranch behaves like it has rules, invisible boundaries that you can't see until you cross them. And when those rules are broken, when those boundaries are violated, the ranch triggers a response. Not random, not coincidental. A deliberate, proportional response that seems designed to warn, to intimidate, or to prevent further investigation. The drilling penetrated a blue layer at depth. Warnings came in about blue auras and electrical activity. The truck exhibited strange behavior. 9 craft appeared in formation. Every step followed logically from the one before, as if the entire sequence was a programmed response to the act of drilling through that barrier. Like the ranch, or something connected to the ranch, was following a protocol, and that protocol included making very clear that certain areas should not be disturbed. But there's one more twist to this story. Because the sky event, as dramatic and impossible as it was, wasn't the end of the strange occurrences at Blind Frog Ranch. It was the beginning of a longer, stranger trail. A trail that would include more anomalies, more unexplained phenomena, more evidence that whatever is buried beneath that property is far more complex than anyone initially suspected. The 9 craft appeared after drilling through the blue layer, after the warnings, exactly when the team returned. The timing was precise, like an intervention. Were they watching the entire time? Something knew when the boundary was crossed. Was the blue layer a seal? It appeared at the same depth in both holes and triggered immediate response. Why formation and silence? If they wanted to hide, they could have. Instead, they appeared and waited. A clear message. We are here. We are aware. We are capable. The ticking truck. The blue aura. 9 craft in perfect formation. The ranch didn't call them. The ranch alerted them. Like a security system triggering an alarm. Something beneath Blind Frog Ranch is monitored, protected, and responds when boundaries are crossed.